High above Earth, in the weightless silence of orbit, astronauts confront more than the void. They face isolation that bends perception, the subtle erosion of reality, discovering that space doesn't just test science, it tests the human soul. You're floating above the night side of Earth. A faint flicker moves outside the window, too slow to be space debris, too smooth to be a reflection. There's no sound, only the thud of your heartbeat in the thick silence of the cabin. For a moment, every instinct says something alive is out there, watching back. You're orbiting Earth at 17,000 miles per hour, but your thoughts slow down. Training tells you it's an illusion. Your nerves whisper it's not. In space, even science feels different under the weight of emptiness. The astronauts who left Earth took with them physics, engineering, and logic. They came back with something harder to define, an awareness that logic and wonder can exist together. Tonight, we cross that same threshold. We explore the moments when reason met mystery. And like all discoveries, it began with a single image later called Earthrise that showed a fragile world drifting in black space. It wasn't just terrain anymore, it was life itself. In 1968, during the Apollo 8 mission, humans left Earth's orbit for the first time. As the spacecraft circled the moon, astronaut Frank Borman looked back and saw the blue planet rising over a gray horizon. He later said,
"The view of the Earth from the moon fascinated me from that distance. It really is a small planet."
Weeks later, that single image changed how people saw their planet. But inside NASA, feelings of awe were kept private. Astronauts spoke in measured technical language. Showing emotion seemed unscientific. During the space race, reason and control were everything. On the Apollo 10 mission, the crew rehearsed a lunar landing. While orbiting the far side of the moon, the side always facing away from Earth, the crew lost radio contact. In that moment, they heard a whistling tone, space music, they called it. Years later, engineers found it was overlapping radio signals. But for those few minutes, floating above the moon, it felt alive. The Cold War demanded control of every message, every feeling. When Soviet cosmonauts reported seeing flashes of light with closed eyes or hearing voices during long isolation, doctors blamed fatigue or radiation. Talking about spiritual experiences could end a career. Both nations ignored the human side of space travel. Yet private notes tell another story. One cosmonaut described light moving through me, not seen but felt. Scientists later found that long isolation and radiation can cause the brain to create sensations that feel almost magical. Behind the calm, radio voices and perfect transmissions, quiet wonder was growing. The people above ideology discovered something deeper. Space was meant to prove the triumph of reason, but it revealed how fragile reason is when faced with infinity. The era of control sent us outward, only to find a mirror shining back from the dark. But after the age of control came a new challenge, learning to live with the silence that control left behind. By the 1980s, the space program had become routine. Shuttles launched so often that the public stopped counting. Inside those cabins, though, something personal was unfolding. The astronauts were no longer symbols of power. They were scientists, engineers, and ordinary humans filled with quiet curiosity. In 1996, during mission STS-75 on the shuttle Columbia, the crew tested a 12-mile tether made to generate electricity using Earth's magnetic field. The cable glowed softly as it stretched across the curve of the planet. Then, without warning, it snapped and drifted away like a silver thread unspooling into darkness. As the crew watched, the video feed showed circular shapes floating nearby, translucent discs pulsing with light. Some moved slowly, others darted like living things. NASA said they were ice crystals, dust or camera effects, which made sense. But in the cabin, it felt more. For a few minutes, even trained scientists stood on the edge of belief. That moment proved that no amount of skill can erase emotion. That was the paradox of the shuttle era. Machines were steady, but the human mind was not. Longer missions brought long silences. The hum of air pumps replaced the sounds of Earth, and astronauts began to experience sensory tricks, flashes of light when they shut their eyes, phantom sounds, touches that vanished when noticed. Psychologists found that isolation in space changes how people sense and imagine things. Without familiar cues, the brain begins to invent them. One astronaut described it like the brain tuning itself like a radio searching for something in the static. Days and nights blurred together. The sun rose every 90 minutes. Sleep came in fragments. Light bounced off metal surfaces, turning the cabin into a world of reflections. As Earth drifted far below, some astronauts turned inward for comfort. Buzz Aldrin once took a quiet moment of prayer on the moon. Later astronauts found their own ways to stay grounded, listening to music, keeping tokens from home, or whispering gratitude in the silence. These weren't signs of weakness. They were ways to stay human in the vast unknown. One crew member wrote in his journal that he spoke softly to the empty cabin, just to hear language alive in a place made of silence. On another mission, an astronaut looked into a window and realized his reflection was the only human face for thousands of miles. Many of these private confessions were hidden for years to protect professionalism. Even when political control faded, psychological control remained. But public expectations change. When one astronaut cried on live TV, calling Earth a living light, people didn't laugh. They understood. The myth of the unshakable hero was giving way to something new, the reflective traveler. As missions grew longer, data confirmed what the stories hinted. NASA psychologists found that isolation could blur the line between what's real and what's imagined. Astronauts reported after images and echoes in their helmets. The reports were scientific, but deeply human. The lost tether from Columbia became a quiet symbol of that time, a reminder that even the most advanced machines couldn't steady the soul. In those long orbits, silence began to speak, through static, reflections, and the pulse of one's own blood. Space didn't erase humanity, it magnified it. The farther they traveled from Earth, the more personal their thoughts became. By the late 1990s, technology had mastered most surprises space could offer, but there was still no device to calm the human heart. The shuttle years became a bridge between eras. Astronauts were no longer soldiers or mystics. They were translators, turning silence into understanding. And from that bridge, humanity crossed into a new chapter, one not about conquest or survival, but about seeing itself more clearly than ever before. When the International Space Station ISS was built, space stopped being a short visit and became a home. The goal changed from exploration to endurance. Astronauts learned not just to work in orbit, but to live there. Over time, that routine led to reflection. The Cold War's secrecy gave way to something more personal, what it means to look down at everything you've ever known. Many astronauts described a shift they couldn't quite name, the overview effect. It's the shock of seeing how fragile Earth is. The thin atmosphere holds every story, every war, every newborn breath. Chris Hadfield said, "The world, when you look at it, it just can't be random. None of the other planets even remotely resemble the precious, life-giving nature of our own planet." He watched storm systems cross continents and felt a strong urge to protect the planet. Another astronaut, Scott Kelly, who spent almost a year in orbit, said that from above, borders disappeared, but scars remained. Deforestation and fires glowed like veins in the dark. Through the windows, Earth looked alive. Lightning crawled across storms, and glowing plankton, tiny sea creatures that shine at night, outlined the coasts. Sunrises and sunsets flashed about 90 times each day, each one a burst of color. Time lost its meaning, but beauty found a rhythm. Many astronauts kept journals, describing colors no camera could capture, greens within greens, blues deepening into violet at the edge of space. Scientists later studied their words and found repeating feelings, oneness, calm, and care, signs of how their minds had changed. This shift wasn't magical or religious, it was neurological. It happened in the brain. The human mind evolved to measure distance in small ways, like miles or steps. But in space, there's no horizon and no far away. Everything feels close at once. That activates brain areas linked to empathy, the ability to care for others, and awe, the deep feeling of wonder. Scientists use special brain scans called fMRIs to study astronauts after they return. Months later, those scans still showed increased activity, suggesting space travel may heighten compassion. But the experience can bring peace or unease. The silence around the ISS is so deep, some say it expects an answer. To fill that quiet, astronauts play music, talk with each other, or listen to the faint sounds of the station. The creak of panels heating and cooling, the hum of air systems. It's like hearing the heartbeat of a machine that keeps them alive. Living in space for months makes the amazing feel normal, but that normal life allows quiet understanding to grow. Modern astronauts speak more about connection than control. Decades ago, training focused on hiding emotions. Now astronauts are encouraged to explore them. NASA includes expressive writing sessions in its mental health routines, times when astronauts describe what they see and how they feel. Their words often become poetic. Even practical engineers write in metaphors, describing moments like floating within the eyelid of Earth. When Chris Hadfield recorded music aboard the ISS, millions listened, not for science, but for the soul in it. When Scott Kelly posted photos of dawn over Africa, people didn't see data, they saw beauty. Audiences no longer expect emotionless explorers, they want human mirrors. Looking outward has become another way of looking inward. At night, astronauts often turn off the lights, float to the window, and let their eyes adjust to the dark. Slowly motion appears, satellites drifting, meteors flashing, storms glowing below. In that still moment, one truth stands out. Everything moves together. Every country, every ocean, every breath. The line between observer and world begins to fade. One veteran astronaut said the view made him feel both huge and tiny, like a cell inside a living organism that just realized the organism existed. That is the modern gaze, the moment where science and spirit meet. What once felt like hallucination now feels like growth. The strange flashes that scared early astronauts are now known to be cosmic rays. High-energy particles hitting the eyes. What was once called mystery is now data, and still beautiful. Over time, humanity has turned wonder from something forbidden into something celebrated. Today's spacefarers stand at the edge of the unknown as both scientists and poets. The new language of space is half equations, half awe. Somewhere between transmissions and research logs, there's always a pause, a silent moment to look down at the swirling clouds and realize that space exploration isn't about escaping Earth. It's about understanding it. We went to study the unknown but found something familiar. The universe stopped feeling foreign. It became home, seen from the outside. Every story of space holds a quiet truth. We left to understand the universe, yet discovered the universe already within us. From the Earthrise photo that redefined humility to the floating tears aboard the ISS, each mission traced a line between intellect and wonder. Even wrapped in sensors and logic, awe persisted. Maybe that's the real secret behind decades of exploration. Space isn't empty, it's reflective. The void answers with what we bring to it. When astronauts peer through a window thick as a coin, they don't just see creation, they see context, the single world their heartbeat comes from. In the end, rockets reached outward, but what those travelers discovered wasn't distance, it was perspective. The universe turned into a mirror, and in that reflection, we saw ourselves. If understanding that reflection, that enduring wonder speaks to you, subscribe and join our next deep dive into how perception shapes belief.